Today I'll be presenting an especially interesting planning study that we did that was using StreetLight Data. This was a study that we were working on along with Nelson Nygaard for the RAPID, which is the transit agency serving Grand Rapids. We began this study before COVID-19 as a sort of traditional comprehensive operational analysis of a transit network, trying to understand the areas that the network is serving and opportunities to improve service. But then after COVID-19 hit, we had some additional things to consider. And so the first section is the sort of the before times. So this is a summary of the general scope of what we were using StreetLight Data for in this situation. We were really trying to understand the travel patterns in the Grand Rapids area using StreetLight Data. We wanted to understand, are there areas of demand that the agency wasn't already serving? We wanted to understand what the demographics of the travel patterns in the area look like and how that could affect transit demand. And we also used the StreetLight Data to evaluate potential corridors for different types of service. So the analysis that we ran using StreetLight also used the zone setup. We had 50 different analysis zones that we designed over the Grand Rapids area. Along with the RAPID, we developed these zones that reflect different parts of the community. We tried to keep the zone size relatively similar to keep them comparable, but we also wanted to identify certain destinations that were of interest to the community. There are a number of zones that were included that actually currently don't have transit service that we were trying to use this analysis to help understand if there's potential demand, and also just to understand how the existing service is used and what that pattern looks like. So this first map that I'm showing is a density of the travel on weekdays, and this is of course using data from pre-COVID times. We see some kind of expected patterns with a strong concentration of travel in downtown Grand Rapids, but then we also do see some other outlying areas that are of interest, such as the Woodland Mall shopping center and also the Rivertown Crossing Shopping Center on the southeast and southwest. So this allowed us to evaluate different markets for the RAPID. Then we also tried to display the travel pattern data in a different way using a flow diagram. So these lines represent the flows between each pair of zones. And so the line thickness obviously indicates the amount of travel that's occurring. And this also helped to understand the travel patterns in a slightly different way. In this case, although we were seeing that downtown is the largest, has the largest amount of travel, there's actually only one of the largest flows going into downtown because those flows are kind of distributed in different directions. And we were seeing a number of larger individual flows further on the south of the region and some other areas. Of course, the one thing to keep in mind when analyzing the data in this fashion is different zones are different sizes, so we always need to keep that in account. So when I was preparing this presentation, we had a question from StreetLight that we knew some people were interested in how to actually create these types of diagrams in mapping software such as ArcGIS. And so as Data had done, I exported the data out of StreetLight and processed it in Excel to put it into a usable format for mapping purposes. And this is kind of the specific step-by-step instructions that can generate these flow maps if you're interested in pursuing this. Essentially, you need to create a spreadsheet that has first you need the coordinates of each of your analysis zones, and then you identify your flows as being a pair of analysis zones. So from zone A to zone B, for example. And you just need to create a spreadsheet that has the coordinates of the center of each of those zones and an identifier that represents the flow. So, you might call it flow AB if it's connecting zones A and B, that kind of thing. And then with that type of a spreadsheet, you can import it into ArcGIS and then apply the tool XY to line that generates those flow lines. And then finally, with those lines created in ArcGIS, you can run a join to attach the any data that you have processed using those flow IDs from the StreetLight data, and you attach the data into your map. This is just another example of how we can apply some demographic variables to the analysis. So in this example, we layered on a couple of demographic considerations on top of the overall travel flows. So in pink, we're showing where the most common flows are for people who are traveling without children. So we see a variety of patterns, but a lot of activity going to and from downtown, which is, I guess, not unexpected. We also looked at individuals who have lower income levels and individuals of color, and we were seeing some of these flows a little bit more concentrated on areas on the south side of the community. And that also aligned with some of the demographic patterns that we knew already. And this is another way to slice the data. In this case, we were looking at a particular corridor and asking the question, would it make sense to have crosstown transit service on this corridor, connecting the two sides of the river? And so we looked at the flows, particularly along the zones, and we could see, to what extent are they connecting with each other, and to what extent are they not? I think in this case, well, we can actually calculate how much of the travel was crossing the river and compare that with the travel that's going where the routes currently go, which is downtown. And in this case, the case wasn't especially strong for the connection, but this analysis gave us the data to indicate that. Great. So those are examples of some of the analysis we did before COVID hit. But then obviously COVID hit and everything changed. Next slide. So this shows the one example of how things changed in the Grand Rapids area. Travel overall declined by 72% at the peak. And public ridership dropped even more severely. So the rapid, of course, as all agencies have across the country, had to reduce service and take other steps to respond to the crisis. And we were conducting analysis around sort of mid to late July, and this was a time that it was very valuable that StreetLight was posting updated travel pattern data with some regularity. So we were able to look back at travel patterns in May of the year and understand how the character of travel had changed in Grand Rapids. Next, okay, thanks. So this is showing the flow maps before and after. The trend is pretty obvious, a very dramatic reduction in travel, especially travel to downtown. You don't see very many of the thicker flows going downtown at all. However, you do see also some areas where travel has maintained itself more than other areas, and that's especially on the south side of the community and some other pockets. This map shows the same comparison just with color coding. So you can see those flows going into downtown had dropped by over 60% by and large, which is just huge. While the blue lines indicate the areas where that drop was not nearly as dramatic. This is showing the same comparison using the density of travel instead. And in this case, it shows a slightly different trend than you might have seen from the flows. This shows that the downtown area still does have a very dominant amount of travel, even though it's much reduced. And so that's one aspect of the comparison. And then this shows the same thing, color coded. So while the percent reduction in downtown is still very high, as well as some of these other pockets, such as some outlying industrial areas, still the travel in downtown is the dominant destination. Okay, and then finally we were very interested in how the demographics of the community's travel had shifted, because obviously that can be influential for who's interested in riding transit. And the patterns that we saw reflected patterns that many of us see anecdotally, and I think other research has indicated this too, that essentially white collar workers, people who have higher income are more able to work from home, and so they're able to travel less. We also see less, a greater reduction in travel for more educated travelers, white and Asian populations, morning peak commuting, and shorter trips. And then on the other hand, travel has not fallen as much for lower income travelers, less educated travelers, Black, Hispanic, and other populations, midday and off-peak and weekend travel, and also long distance trips. We think that these are more likely to be representative of sort of the essential workers. And then finally, we just have a couple of the graphs that sort of demonstrate those trends that we saw. So this is the trend by income of how much people are reducing their travel. Higher income populations reducing their travel more. The same trend by education. We see that people without a high school diploma have not been able to reduce their travel nearly as much as people who have higher educations. A similar graph comparing the racial and ethnic patterns. Again, we see the white and Asian populations able to reduce their travel significantly more than other racial and ethnic groups. And then finally, the comparison by day and time. We see the weekday peak and early morning sort of commuting times have reduced their travel the most, while some of these off-peak and weekend times have not reduced their travel quite as much. Oh, and then we also have the breakdown by distance. So we see that shorter distance trips, people are able to avoid more easily than longer distance trips, which tend to be more important or more unavoidable.